Section 5 of the Gypsy Wife quilt has Crazy Ann, pinwheel with border, square and square with courthouse steps, 2 sizes of square and square, and half square triangles.
So I started looking at the Crazy Ann block and I realized that the pattern calls for like 15 different fabrics, and I'm like, crazy lady, I don't have that much fabric. So I pulled as much as I could from the stash that I'm using for the Gypsy Wife. I didn't pull anything else. And then I went through and tried to sort of categorize it. So here's what I've ended up with. For the center rectangular parts for Crazy Ann, I'm doing these two, and I'm actually using one for both Y and AA in the pattern. So I'm not doing a different fabric for that center square. So I really only have 14 fabrics. MNOP, which is the triangles, the big triangles on the outside, those are all going to be these light purples. QRST, I wish I had another colorway of this fun fabric, but I don't, so I'm using this one for my fourth one, and that is for the outer squares. And then I've got like these, so these kind of go together, so I've got UVWX for the smaller triangles in the outer squares. 14 fabrics for this one block. So I'm going to cut my fabrics and see how it goes. Okay, so I have all the pieces cut out for Crazy Ann, and I've got to admit, I've felt pretty confident about this quilt so far, but I cut out my pieces and I've got them sort of labeled, and to be honest, this just feels like a hot mess to me. So I'm going to try to sort through this and figure out what is going on with the Crazy Ann block. So I've got my pattern booklet, which is up here. It's off camera, you can't see it. And I'm going to try to replicate the layout that is on page 10 for Crazy Ann. So I've got these all labeled with alphabet numbers, alphabet letters, and I'm following the letters that are in the booklet. Okay, let's see what we can do with this. So UVWX, those are the little triangles. Z and AA, those are the big kind of rectangle-y triangles. Oh, I know that this is my center square. I got that. Woohoo! So that's Y. These are the outer squares. QRST. QRST. Maybe I should just use another one of those colors. I don't know. Oh, maybe I'll leave it. And then MNOP are the big triangles for the outer squares. So let's see what I can do with this. Okay. I think I might be able to manage this. And then do I match up the... Are we matching up colorways here? Am I sticking with the same kind of color scheme for each one? What am I doing? What am I doing with my life here? I don't know, I kind of like that. That looks good. Oh, maybe I'll use that one instead. I like that one better. And then that goes there. Put that over here with the purple. And put that one with the pink. I feel like I'm making progress here. All right, and then our Z and AA. And that kind of goes, it spins around, sort of pinwheel-ish from the center. I feel like I might have a problem here. 1, 2. Okay. So here's what I did wrong when I did these. You're supposed to cut rectangles and then cut those rectangles diagonally in half. And these two work. These two are matching up, but these two are supposed to go like this. And clearly what I did is I just kind of folded my fabric. I didn't pay attention to what I was doing. So one fabric was face up, one fabric was face down. They all needed to be face up. So I need to recut these two. And I'm afraid that the same thing's going to happen with my Y. Yeah. All right, so I've got a little bit of fabric to recut because for the squares and triangles, I don't think it really matters, but for these long rectangular triangles, the direction of the fabric does matter. So I'm going to have to recut two rectangles so that they're facing the correct direction. Okay, so I recut my two rectangles, Z and AA. One was correct, one wasn't, so I had to recut one of each. It wasn't too bad, easy peasy lemon squeezy, but it's a mistake that I don't want you to make, so don't do what I do. I tested it for you. There you go. So I've got my two triangles cut in the correct direction, and now those go kind of pinwheely around the center, and then the other fabric matches up, also kind of pinwheely around the center. So I'm going to see if I can get a wider shot of this layout so you can see all the pieces. Okay, so here is the layout of Crazy Ann, and I'm going to go through the construction using the corner pieces and then the center rectangle pieces, because each of those have sort of a unique way of putting them together. So that's the next step. Okay, I'm going to start by looking at one of those corner units. So there's 4 kind of big squares in each corner of Crazy Ann that is made using a large triangle, 2 small triangles, and a square. So the first thing I'm going to do is make these 2 triangles and the corner square into a triangle, and then that triangle will attach to this triangle to form the square. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the square to the triangle along one side of the square. And then be sure to press that open so that you can place the next triangle on the next side of the square. And then my next step is to sew this triangle to the square along this side. And then it will cross this triangle at this point. So now I've got this triangle made from the pieces to make one triangle unit, and then the other large triangle to attach to that to make the square. So it's essentially a half square triangle, except this half of the square is a little more complex. And then you'll repeat that process for all 4 of the corner squares. So the next step is the rectangles that go in between those squares, kind of in a pinwheel around the block. I'm going to press these real quick. So there are 2 long rectangles of different fabrics, and then you cut those rectangles in half diagonally the long way. So there are 2 triangles, but they're long triangles. So you have the base, the height, and then the hypotenuse of the triangle, and then the 2 go together to make a rectangle. Now the best way to do this is to give a little extra on the pointy tip part. So about 1/4 inch you're going to want to leave out so that it's not tip to tip, and that will help make the rectangle shape. So about 1/4 inch on this side and then 1/4 inch on this side, and then stitch along this side of the 2 triangles. So what will happen after you stitch the 2 long sides of the triangles together, when you open it out, there will be a complete rectangle and it won't be kind of off on the corners. So press that open, press to the dark side, and then if you want to make it easier, trim off the dog ears. So there are kind of 2 different dog ear sizes, one from the long side and one from the short side. And since I pressed to that side, the dog ear's sticking out over there. And then that results in an actual rectangle. If you line them up, and I used my other fabrics to do this because I couldn't use them for the quilt block. If you line them up exactly, this is what's going to happen. So I have lined these up point to point and stitched along that point. But what happens when I open that rectangle is that it's not really a rectangle. There's a piece that comes out over here, and then on this side there's a piece that comes out over here, and it ends up being, for lack of a better word, wonky. So it's important to move that little bit over so that it does turn out as a complete rectangle. All right, so repeat that construction process for the rectangles. So now we have the corners and we have the center rectangles, and the next step is to assemble them in rows. So this will be assembled together as one row. This will be assembled together as the center row, and then this will be assembled together as the final row. And then those rows are assembled together to create the block. And here is the finished Crazy Ann block. If you use contrasting colors on those rectangles like I did, you can really see that pinwheel form. I have chosen to do this quilt very scrappy, and while I'm trying to stick with similar colors and sort of similar fabric styles, it is very scrappy. For those quilters who are working on the Gypsy Wife in a very controlled way, this actually can be a very impactful block. So if you're using a specific set of colors, solids, it looks really good in solids. Mine's scrappy. I just kept those the same like the instructions suggested, but it's a fun block to do even though there's a lot of different pieces to it, and I think it looks really cool. The Pinwheel with Border block uses 4 squares and 2 sets of strips to make the half square triangles that form the pinwheel and the border. The half square triangles can be made by placing the 2 squares together and drawing a diagonal line from corner to corner on the square. And then stitching 1/4 inch out from either side of that line, and then cutting that line. So now that your half square triangles are made, arrange them in a pinwheel. I think I'm going to put the dark ones towards the center. Stitch those two together, stitch those two together, and then attach the 4 square. Try to line up the pinwheel point when you stitch together. Here I'm a little bit off. And then add the borders. It's always hard with batiks because sometimes the sides look the same and there's no real top or bottom. So attach the borders, and that is the pinwheel with border. And this is my finished pinwheel with border. Square in Square with Courthouse Steps starts out with a center square, and that is bordered to create a larger square. And then that square is bordered by triangles. So first sew one triangle to the top and the bottom of the square, and then attach the other 2 triangles to the other sides of the square. One step I'm not showing is pressing the seams. I'm not showing that very much, but make sure that after you stitch seams that you press to one side so that the next piece that you're attaching has a smooth place to attach. So there are some points here to worry about. Again, pinning the points helps, and then stitching on the side that shows that point seam will also help. And that is the finished Square in Square with Courthouse Steps block. Section 5 has 3 Square in Square blocks, 1 smaller one and 2 of the larger size. And the way that you do a Square in a Square block is you have 1 square and then 4 smaller squares. And then the 4 smaller squares are placed on the 4 corners, and then you stitch along this diagonal, trim, and fold open. The best tip for the Square in the Square is to do the 2 opposite corners first, trim about 1/4 inch away from the stitching line, press those open, and then do the other 2 corners. 3 Square in Square blocks for section 5 in 2 different sizes. There are 2 half square triangle blocks in this Gypsy Wife quilt. One is in section 4, one is in section 5. So I'm using the same fabrics that I used for my half square triangle in section 4 because I cut twice as many as I needed. So I'm going to be using a different background fabric, but I'm going to be doing the same process that I did for the half square triangle for section 4. So it's a repeat, exact same block as the half square triangle in section 4. So the easiest way to do this is to place 2 squares together and then draw a line diagonally down the center. Another thing that you can do, and I apologize for doing this off camera, is you can fold that square in half diagonally to make the 2 triangle shapes, and then you can stitch 1/4 inch on either side of that fold and then cut along the fold. So that's another trick that you can do to easily make the half square triangle blocks for this block. Okay, so I have all of my half square triangles sewn, and what you do is just cut along that fold. It's a little bit quicker if you use the fold to mark instead of using a pen, but whatever way works best for you. Some people just eyeball it. And then press them to one side, and then we'll assemble them in 4 rows of 4. Okay, so I'm going to start laying out, and the background fabric's all going one direction, and the focus fabric is all going one direction. One thing I'm not doing with this block, with this half square triangle block, that I did with the half square triangle block for section 4. In section 4, I took the time to trim each block so that they were all identical in size, in the correct size, and I can't remember the size right now. So I'm going to kind of experiment a little bit, and I'm not trimming these. I'm just sewing them and then placing them and sewing them together. And I'm going to see how much of a difference there is in accuracy when I am careful and cautious and trim these squares down to the correct size, trim the dog ears off, and when I just kind of go for it. So let me stitch this together, and then I will show you the finished half square triangle block, and then compare it to the other block where I took a little bit more time and effort. And here is my finished half square triangle block for section 5. So sewing the squares together wasn't too bad, but when I started assembling the squares into the rows, I immediately regretted my decision. And I was like, no, I'm going to go through with this because I need to show the difference when you don't trim and take time to measure and square up. So this is the block that I ended up with. And try as I might, because of the differences in the square sizes, I definitely did not line up points. I have a lot of points off. I even have some rows kind of off kilter. It just looks like it's not even and square and perfect. I mean, not necessarily perfect, but you can tell that there are shifts, and that's not a look that I want. The other thing I had difficulty with when I trimmed off the dog ears on the first block, it actually reduced some of the bulk, and it's hard to show this, but the dog ears make a lot of bulk at these seam intersections. Trimming the dog ears actually helps to reduce that bulk and makes for a sharper corner seam intersection. So this is the one that I'm going to use for section 5. I'm going to put it in. I have a scrappy quilt. I'm okay with it looking a little bit off. And it will be a reminder that what I should be doing is what I did for section 4. So again, we made the half square triangles the same way, but what I did in section 4, and I'll link the section 4 video below, is that I trimmed every single half square triangle square to the exact same size. In the process of trimming it down, it cut off those dog ears, and then what happened was everything lined up more accurately. It was easier to sew, it was easier to pin those points together, and the result looks much sharper. So side by side, you can really see some of the same fabrics are used. I know I used different background fabrics, but that shouldn't throw off what I'm trying to show here. So you can really see the difference when I am cautious and careful with squaring up and measuring correctly, and then when I'm just putting those squares together to make half square triangle squares and then not trimming before I sew them together.